Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Venture Fuel Visionaries podcast, where we introduce you to the innovators and builders creating the future of business. I'm your host, Fred Schonenberg, the founder of Venture Fuel, where we help the world's best companies commercialize innovation through startup partnerships. We took this episode from an Innov8rs LearningLab session. Innov8rs is a community of innovators that get together to discuss best practices. So Tito is the senior manager of pipeline and insights for the startup engagement team at Comcast NBCUniversal LIFT Labs. In this, he shares key learnings from their process to explore the dynamics of internal versus external learnings and how these insights inspire his colleagues, educate teams and business units, as well as uncover opportunities that drive startup-driven transformation within a large organization. I know you'll get a lot of value from this. Tito's been a guest on the podcast before, and we asked for special permission to share this with you after we heard him talk to the Innov8rs community. I hope you enjoy. I'm so excited to be able to kind of share Tito's wisdom with you all today. I'll give you 30 seconds on myself and Venture Fuel, and then we'll get out of the way from there. But I'm Fred. I'm the founder of Venture Fuel. We launched the company 11 years ago to help large organizations commercialize innovation. And the word commercialize was really important to us, is that we wanted to find startups and new technologies that could work with large organizations and drive some sort of commercial, tangible outcomes. So not just pilots, not startup petting zoos, but actually things that scale across the organizations and drive transformational value. And we've been fortunate to get to work with Tito and the team at Comcast NBCUniversal's LIFT Labs for 6 years now. And our most public-facing work is their AI accelerator, which I'm sure Tito will talk about. But I think what we wanted to focus on today is something that we see them doing that not a lot of other corporates are doing, which is incorporating insights into the work. So when you work at a large company and you work with startups, we all know the energy and the tangible outcomes, but also you're at the cutting edge of what's next. You're seeing both your internal CTOs and your leaders working with these next generation startups, and you get a purview into the future that most people within the core organization are not getting. So how do you share that strategy back with the group? And so that's really our focus today is to share how Tito's thinking about that, the work that he's doing, and then some tangible outcomes for everybody listening. So with all that said, I'm going to stop talking for the most part and just help Tito guide this conversation. So Tito, would you like to introduce yourself to everybody?
Hey, yeah, thanks, Fred. Thanks everybody for having me today. And so, I'm Tito Obaisi. Like I mentioned, I'm with the LIFT Labs team here. So my role, as has been mentioned already, is around pipeline and insight. So I kind of help our team with sourcing the startups that we end up working with as a group, and also at the other end of the the kind of the cycle there is kind of delivering the insights from what we learn from the collaborations with the startups. And so taking that step back, what LIFT Labs does is we kind of operate across NBC, Comcast, and Sky, and we really focus on identifying innovators in the startup ecosystem who can really plug into product roadmaps and deliver business value today, right? Enterprise ready startups. And we really focus on helping our business units rapidly evaluate, the potential impact fit for Comcast, and then any learnings we can derive, and then kind of help our teams really move at that speed of innovation. That's a high level what we do.
And Tito, maybe just for folks that maybe have not been exposed to the AI accelerator work, can you just give me an idea of the scale of that, just as an example of one piece of what LIFT Labs does?
Yeah. So we do this work year round, but we do have like two tentpole kind of convenings twice a year through our AI accelerator. And so that's where we kind of identify particularly strategically relevant companies who have the potential to have really outsized impact. We are stage agnostic. We work with pre-seed to unicorn. So companies like Windsurf and Ryder were in our last cohort, in addition to pre-seed companies in that same cohort. And we do it cohort style. It's really all about how do we find the companies that have the ability to really push the envelope at this particular moment for related to strategic initiatives that are in flight.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing as a program, you've looked at over 3,000 generative AI startups in the past 2 years. I believe the number is 45 active pilots, POCs happening today within the scope of what NBC Universal is, right? So there's so many different programs here. But you mentioned that stage agnosticity, right? It's unbelievable. Windsurf, for anyone that doesn't know, just got acquired by OpenAI for $3 billion, or is about to be, right? And so you have that unicorn level, which some people might not say is a startup, down to the idea stage. And the whole idea is, how do you inject that within the organization? And it's an amazing program. The piece that obviously we wanted to talk about today is insights within that. Can you talk a little bit about how the Insights program came to be, and the role of that at LIFT Labs?
Yeah. So we've always been thinking about how do we codify and memorialize what we're learning from startups, and our central thesis as a team, or one of them is that a part of it is that as a large corporate, there's so much you can learn from the most nimble, innovative startups. And so, how do we think about how do we codify that? How to memorialize that? How do we share that with our colleagues internally? And so we've kind of taken the position that we realize that we got to come from our particularly unique vantage point, which is the fact that we have the one foot in the startup ecosystem. We're learning from founders, investors, ecosystem players like Venture Fuel, what's new, what's exciting, what's innovative. And then we have the other foot deep into the tactical side of deploying new technology at an enterprise like the size of Comcast at scale, like the legal hurdles, the data security concerns, the stakeholder management, the change management. And so it's like what's happening at the juxtaposition of these two realities is kind of our insights from. And so that's kind of been the basis of what we want to share of our insights program and our insights philosophy, and where we try to make sure we operate from.
I love that. And Melody, now that you put us full screen, I think you were holding that because I was going to do a poll, which I forgot to do. I think now is actually a great time to do it. What we wanted to do just very quickly, we're going to drop a question on the side here, just to see if the people on the call, if you're collecting insights, and if you are, who the audience is for that. Is that possible to put up for everybody? If y'all can just take a second and just answer. Great. And as that continues to kind of populate, we'll share that with everyone. One of the things I think is interesting, Tito, is that unique vantage point, right? You're sitting at the crux of what's new and next, as well as your internal organization. How on earth are you able to digest AI within that, right? This is arguably the fastest moving, most transformational technology in our lifetimes. It seems like a very difficult task to kind of digest all the changes that are happening there, as well as then share them with the organization. How are you making sense of something that's moving so quickly?
Yeah, it's something that teams across the company are wondering and are focusing on, are wondering. And it's a focus of our team, right? It's all AI all the time right now. So, um, first you just got to be open to the fire hose. Like it's just coming at you all the time, and you got to be just lean into it. That's kind of been a big focus for our team, and so we're often surprised our team internally, where even people who don't focus on this on our team day to day. They'd be like, my job is as an insights lead here. They're sometimes surprised by the fact that they're just in it. They actually know more than the average person does, right? And so that's a big one. Just living in the fire hose, and just being okay with this coming at you and not understanding everything. But a big one really is approaches just really staying close to the innovators, just being in their slipstream. So we try to teach it, approach it like being in school, more or less. Like we have founders in our group who are PhDs, who are people who are building a lot of the core technology that is underpinning this AI revolution. And we just treat it as, my job a lot of times during our programming is just to literally pull people aside to the corner and say, hey, this is something, a really nebulous topic in AI. Just talk me through it from your very unique perspective as a founder building in this space. So we try to take it from that approach of like, we're in school. As a group, we are not subject matter experts, but we hang out with a lot of subject matter experts as part of our job. So that kind of helps us make sure that we are taking that, bringing that unique insight into back into Comcast.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you and everybody on the LIFT Labs team is amazing at is that intellectual curiosity of just always learning, and it's a great environment to do that because the founders go so deep in whatever their focus area is, and one of the reasons we've kept it as a cohort vibe is it's really dynamic when you get 6, 8 people with different laser focuses in a room to talk about what's happening. How are you thinking about uh, ensuring that these insights are distinctive versus maybe some of the other groups within Comcast NBC Universal? Like, obviously, there's lots of teams thinking about AI and the future of work and the future of business. How do you keep your lens sort of focused on what your vantage point is?
Yeah. That's a big thing that we try to prioritize is like what is our swim lane, right? So our team actually sits within our strategic development org. So we sit alongside our ventures team, our corporate ventures team, who are doing some great work, making some really groundbreaking investments in some key AI companies. We have a transformation team that's really focused on like how are we thinking about AI transformation across the entire company, and they're also within our org. So people who are tackling this from different angles, and we don't want to be in what they're doing. We're really trying to focus on that where the rubber meets the road part, right? Having great products is awesome, but like what can be learned from actually deploying AI at scale? You read all the time about companies getting a lot of enterprises like Johnson and Johnson recently, frustrated about not being able to get from experimentation to production or to true business value and scaling back a lot of their AI use cases. We try to make sure that as a group, from our day-to-day work and from the insights we're generating, how do we take the learnings from what we know works and doesn't work at Comcast and drive that back into our day-to-day work to make sure that when we're bringing a company into one of our internal colleagues, they're going to be driving business value, right? And so what we try to make sure is like a cycle where everything feeds into each other, where the insights feed into our sourcing, which feeds into our day-to-day like tactical deployment. And so make sure that this is a kind of self-reinforcing cycle about making sure that that tactical part where the rubber meets the road is working.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is magical about this is it's not academic only, right? Like a lot of times when you read an insights document, it's somebody pontificating on their view of the future. This is very much grounded in reality. Now you're at the cutting edge of that reality, but you're running programs with these startups and your business units, and so the insights are not just academic. There's something that other business units, C-suite leaders within Comcast can action on, which I think is very unique. I am curious, seeing the results of the poll, which are incredibly interesting, on some of the tactics here. Like, how are you presenting insights to the group? Who's the audience? How frequently are you? Basically, how would you answer the poll? Would be the question. But like, how how are you delivering them? I guess would be the first question.
Yeah, so we're always open to experimenting with format and what that looks like. We realize that case studies are a big one. Our colleagues want to see what is and isn't working, and it doesn't have to always be a win. It can always be like we tried this thing and it didn't work. And there are lessons learned from that. And our colleagues really respond well to just seeing the practical replay of an implementation and what that looked like day to day. And so we'll have that in multiple formats. We'll have it in written format. We'll have events where we kind of have fireside chats where we'll bring the startup in, we'll bring the business unit leader in, and we'll have people come into our space in Philadelphia in our headquarters and just sit down and like talk through, take questions from the audience, talk through the deployment, what that looked like. We have we're really good at disseminating this information in various mediums. So like, social media, you know, um, we have video formats. We'll have video interviewing the founders, and so getting the nuggets and tidbits from what they're learning from them. So we try to take a very wide-ranging approach to see whatever resonates with the medium that works for our internal colleagues. But it's really about, making sure that we are in the room when these back and forths are going on, right? So we're sitting there in the room as the startups and the founders are tackling and tackling challenges and issues, and what are the legal hurdles? What is our legal team comfortable with or not comfortable with, and how do startups need to adjust their deployment to make sure that we can work for Comcast? And we're having sitting there in whiteboarding sessions, and people are hacking away and trying to spin something up really quickly, and so we're in there in these sessions, making sure we're asking our pointed insights questions and trying to figure out how to deliver that in ways that our colleagues will find digestible.
I think I've been in AI too long with you now, because I was going to describe it as multimodal, which is a very AI term, but I think it's really interesting because people consume content very differently. And a big shout out to Isa, who's on the call, who helps with the storytelling of this, both internally and externally. But it's really cool. One thing I would share with the audience that to me was very breakthrough and seems simple is we hosted a number of startups in this beautiful space that Comcast has, and brought in executive leaders, but also business unit leaders, and we had the startups set up, right, like almost like a science fair type thing that is not new, but the business leader that had worked with the startup was with them, and watching the Comcast NBC Universal employees talk to their colleagues about how they worked with the startup and what the results of that was so dynamic. And it was just one change, right? Instead of just the founder pitching, you brought in the business unit, but it showed how this comes to life. And then to take that and figure out how to story tell it with video clips, it can be newsletters, it can be other things that I think everyone thinks of first. But it really creates a lot of momentum for startup engagement, and also helps people kind of come into the work that you're doing where they're most comfortable. We've played around with like Google LLM Notebook, right, where it's like basically it's a podcast off of the insights, and so there's a lot of ways to play, and I think it's really cool to see how y'all are experimenting with that and figuring out the right way to share the information. One question I had is the other side of this, which is like, how on earth do you stay on top of this, the sources, and get tactical here? Like, what do you read? How are you? Obviously, there's a tremendous process that goes to finding all the startups. But how are you staying on top of all the changes in AI? And are there any hacks or places you would have people go?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, it's trying to. I think in general, we all have our favorite publications that we read. Like I happen to like the FT, for example. So like finding out who the journalists and people who are doing really interesting work in this area is always good to have your favorite couple. But I try to personally, we have a group of really aligned ecosystem players and investors who are playing and investing and working and operating in the space at a deep technical level. And what I tend to do is regularly have check-ins with them and say, hey, what are you hearing? What companies are coming across your desk? What deals are you seeing? What are you seeing out in conferences? And trying to in aggregate, kind of pull in the knowledge and what people are hearing and figure out what's arising from that. A lot comes from the sourcing process itself. it's like when you see a certain type of company coming popping up over and over and over, that's something that you kind of see is happening there. Um, and that's so we kind of learn a lot through even the sourcing process. And we talk to hundreds, not thousands of companies every year. And so even those companies that we don't end up working with, but those short conversations, you learn a lot. And so like we're always documenting and taking notes from even these conversations we're having exploratorily with companies. Um, One thing I do love Notebook LM personally, like it's the great way to get like really quickly sharp on really dense topics for me. So I'll just throw in a bunch of articles and YouTube videos on a topic that I want to get smarter about, and it just turns into a 30-minute podcast. It's very compelling in a really airy way. That's like a big fan of that. Yes, Notebook LM is critical, and that's a great example of a bottoms-up innovation at a large corporate. So like large corporates can be innovative in terms of product, and that's really encouraging. Um, for people like us. So that those are a couple different areas, and it's actually funny, like if these machine learning algorithms on our devices, on our phones, and our news feeds are so good now that if you train them enough and with what you click on, they get really good at understanding what you want to read. And so I get a lot of things just popping up on my phone in that little news feed on everyone's device. And you're saying like, oh, that's great. I just kind of have things that pop up all the time. So it's like how do you go to all the different places that you can find all the different people who are doing cool things, and really the insights are come from aggregating and synthesizing all those sources, I would say.
I love that. Also, we're going to go to questions to the group. To warm you all up for the questions, I would love if you all want to put into the chat if there's any sources like Notebook LM or places that you go to stay on top of insights. It can be AI or unrelated to AI. But just curious from the audience standpoint if there's anything that's really interesting. And of course, start putting questions in also. Tito, what is the value of insights? Like, what is it helping Comcast and also specifically like LIFT Labs? Like, how is it helping you all on your mission um, for working with strategically relevant startups?
Um, how is it helping? So the big thing we're trying to do as a group when it comes to insights is we're trying to help our internal colleagues from senior leadership to line of business, to end users, general population, rank and file, get smarter on technology that maybe they don't have the bandwidth or the access to the same resources and expertise of founders that we do, and just get smarter on that and figure out what the use cases are and what the applicability is for their work. And so we try to ground it in figuring out understanding who our audiences are. And so I think that's a big part of insights is like, who is your audience? Like I mentioned, is it your C-suite board, or your board level? Is it your general pop? Is it your subject matter expert? And figuring out how to talk to them in ways that are interesting to them, right? And so if we accomplish that, that is value right there. And so we try to make sure through all the different methods and mediums that I listed previously is that we are helping our colleagues get smarter on this stuff. And so, we've in the 2.5 years that we've been focusing on here on AI, we've seen engagement steadily increase internally, with our kind of profile around this space and our um, our perception as subject matter experts on AI deployment is something that we're really proud of as a group that's been kind of growing into reputationally internally. And we see that as evidence that we are providing value when it comes to not just helping our colleagues deploy AI, but also learn from AI. So that session you mentioned the other day, Fred, where we had the startups and the business unit leaders is one of our best attended events we've ever had, right? And so like it was packed in there. Fire code was an issue at a certain point. People were there showing up just thinking about, hey, this is the group and this is the team where they're going to help me get smarter on AI, and that's kind of what we want to be able to be known as a group.
I think it's really interesting too. I'd say, one of the things that I see happening with the organization is, as you all have been sharing the insights and the storytelling internally, is the relationship with the core has moved from push to pull. Like, instead of saying, "Oh, here, you want to work with startups? You want to work with startups?" It's more like them saying, "Hey, I have a business challenge, and I've seen how you all have solved it over here, and I read your thing about this, and I think it's really changed the dynamic internally, which is really really cool to watch that evolution." Along those lines, one of the things that you all started or announced this year is the always on sourcing. That it's not just around those two tentpole events, but that you're always looking. How has that impacted the organization as well as maybe evolved the insights work?
Yeah, that's that was a big change for us in 2025, and it's really we do kind of we're talking to companies all year round, right? But it's all about how do we make sure that we are finding ways to deploy them in the most timely fashion rather than simply those two times a year. Um, so I think what we found is that with Always On, it allows for us to have tighter feedback loops, right? And so at the speed AI is moving, which is in light years, right? Something that may have been true in January will not be true in June or in December. And so being able to have this always on sourcing model allows us to understand what's new and happening today, um, deploy those as quickly as we can internally, take that feedback and then drive that into insights, which drives our sourcing, right? And so as the person who kind of sits in both of those areas, sourcing and insights, it's the same hat for me, right? It's like being able to, like, what are we learning and generating in terms of insights that can drive more targeted, more relevant, strategically sourcing. So that's kind of the big benefit to being always on, for us as a group. And I think we're seeing dividends.
All right, one more question and then we'll go to the audience here. But I'm curious, what advice do you have? Maybe for some of the folks on this call, it looked like about 70+% were doing some sort of insights work. What from sort of stewarding this thing, are there any sort of 2.0 learnings that you think you would give people advice on to kind of take their insights to the next level?
Yeah. I think I've sprinkled some of that throughout. It's like, knowing your audience is very key. Like knowing who you're talking to and what that category of colleague really cares about. So our CTO has certain concerns that our line of business lead does not, right? And so being able to provide insights that speak to the categories of people you want to move the needle for is very clear, and that should drive you know your insights in along to keeping really tightly to your swim lane. Like, what is your that really unique perspective that you have as an insights professional. I would say also don't be afraid to be a little provocative. I think that's kind of the general understanding is that as a large corporate, there's only so innovative a large company can be relative to a startup. And so by nature, some of what you're learning from the innovators that you're collaborating will be a bit of a hit to the status quo. So obviously there's within boundaries, but don't be afraid to kind of be a bit provocative. And then I would say also probably really figure out, related to my first point, like what really moves the needle for the people you're talking to. Um, be figure out how people want to digest information. Being as multimodal as possible, right? Is a great approach. Some people want to hear it in person. Some people want to hear case studies. Some people want to read a report. Some people want to watch a short TikTok style clip. Some people want to, listen to a longer interview format, podcast or interview format. Figuring out how to, I would say, do as much as you're able to do in terms of format, and what our comms team is really good at doing is taking the same content and turning it into different formats, right? And so I think being able to have that storytelling ability to talk to people in the way they want to receive information is really the key to making sure that your insights are being received. Because a lot of people, have been there where you're just writing reports into the void and you just don't want to be there, right? So
Yeah, there's nothing worse than sending out that email to the internal organization being like, hello? Like, did
yeah,
anyone see that? And like, also, we've all been on the other end of that email where we're like, oof, do I need to read this whole thing? Which parts do I need to do? So I love the way that it's, we continue to evolve it, play with it, think about different ways to present it, and always start with that. What's the value here? What's the tangible outcome? So we'd love to take questions from the audience. You can either put it in the chat and I will ask it, or you can raise your hand. I, of course, have more I can ask you, Tito, as well, but just want to see if anybody has anything pressing. My question for you, as people ruminate on what they want to know, is uh, are there any new technologies, AI or otherwise, that have you particularly excited? Are there things that you've seen, whether it's from the current cohort or most recent cohort, or looking forward, coming out of some of the insights work you're doing that you think might be interesting to the folks on this call?
yeah. There's the understanding that it's the year of agents, right? So that's nothing new there. I think what we're seeing that is maybe it's the year of agents in terms of the functionality is increasingly there. You're seeing tool use, you're seeing computer use, you're seeing MCP, A2A, all this stuff popping up. But I think for enterprises, there's a sense that there's a lot of additional scaffolding that isn't quite there yet for this functionality and agents to be enterprise ready. You have governance, you have data security, you have data access, you have permissioning, you have authentication, you have non-human identification. You have all these different things that are needed to make an agent a stochastic um, technology like LLMs that are non-deterministic that can just do whatever in theory, right? They don't swim within their own swim lanes all the time. You need to be able to give these things guardrails to make sure that you're having consistent output. And I think that's kind of where the big effort needs to be now. Like we have increasing functionality. These agents can do really cool things. It's about seeing where all the infrastructure to make sure that they are enterprise ready. I think that's a big one. Another one I think we've noticed is how a lot of companies, especially companies that we work with, startups, when we say enterprise ready and being stage agnostic, we're seeing companies smaller, more enterprise ready at earlier stages than pretty much ever before. I think it probably, I haven't been around that long, but I would say in business history, these are companies that are, under sometimes 30, 40 people who are servicing 15, 20% of this Fortune 100. They are finding ways to leverage AI internally to really extend their headcount to make sure that they are optimizing their resources. And, one way I heard someone put it is that, they see their employees at startups as less of output producers and more like intelligence allocators, right? Being able to take these tools and this functionality and this ability to execute really well on particular tasks and just orchestrate that intelligence and to basically make that person supercharged and super productive. And so we're seeing as a future of work kind of thing, this is kind of, startups who are at the forefront of this stuff. And where everyone else is kind of just lagging, right? The innovation really isn't evenly distributed in that way. And so I think it's some really interesting stuff. And some of the companies that even we work with are doing some amazing things with very little resources.
I think that's one of the coolest things to watch too, is because you nailed it. Like one of the huge trends happening right now is these companies are becoming enterprise ready. And just for anybody on the call that, I mean, obviously it's an intuitive statement, but like the way we think about it is like enterprise ready means it can work with your enterprise and scale with it today. this is not just a pilot and you've hit the scope of the startup. It can't grow with you, but it actually can drive meaningful, scalable value. And it used to be, you'd look at headcount. How big is this startup? Like its funding, its headcount as one of the reasons to believe. And now that has been turned on its head. It is, really small number of people can do really outsized work. And it's very interesting to see that dynamic when you bring in the executives from a large company to talk to the executives from the startup and see how efficient it is, and to think about different ways of structuring uh, groups and teams to get this sort of outsized result. The other thing you said that I think is really interesting because it might apply to your role is this idea of intelligence allocators, right? It's this idea of how can I take a lot of disparate information, condense it, disseminate it into the swim lanes that make the most sense, and then deliver it in a way that's digestible. In a lot of ways, that's part of not only the roles of a lot of folks, but the role you're doing at Comcast, which is kind of cool.
Yeah,
Full circle.
yeah, it's like it's something where you feel like um there's a lot of disruption here happening, but there's a lot of opportunity when it comes to the way we're all going to work and what our role and what our function is as parts of an economy in the future. I think is we're seeing that innovation happening real time. I think that's part of what our vantage point allows us to see. So we're really
Yeah,
excited to be a part of that.
it's very, very cool. So I'm gonna ask one last question, then I'll turn it back to the innovators team. Uh, This is actually Laura, who runs LIFT Labs, hates this question. Uh, she's told me on our podcast that I should never ask it of her again. So I'm going to ask it of you. Is there something I didn't ask you that I should have? Is the question. And really, it is there something that you think this audience should hear that maybe we didn't get to today?
Oh, that's a good one. Let me take a think about that one. We touch on a lot of different things. I would say as an innovation group, I think as people who are part of integration groups at sometimes large, sometimes smaller corporates, I think being able to communicate the value of bottom up innovation, I think is an important effort to undertake, right? So, you have, and particularly in AI, there's all this frustration with um, a million pilots running around everywhere, and people think that there's too much chaos from the CIO level. Like the CIOs and the CTOs are like, I kind of want to have some oversight and governance. And there's a tendency to either sit on the sidelines when it comes to AI transformation and wait things out and assume it's all frothy, or to kind of be really stringent about how you are deploying AI innovation top down, right? I think there is, with Notebook LM being a great example, there is innovation that comes when you give people the right guardrails and the right tools um, to um, kind of innovate and solve the business problems that they are struggling with on a daily basis, right? If you can, as an enterprise, if you as an enterprise can equip your colleagues with the right tool sets, the right components, the right guardrails, the right framing. For example, one thing we heard is that there was a large insurance company, Fortune 100, that was able to unite their AI transformation efforts throughout the company around the idea of identifying and like friction busting, they called it, right? Being able to identify friction points throughout the org, and everyone is focused on here's how we deploy AI is to destroy the most galling friction points. And so being able to unite people around shared initiatives, around shared goals, around the right guardrails, around the right components, really can foster that bottoms up innovation that can complement the larger strategic top down initiatives. And so being able to, as an innovation group, you have access to the people in the startups and to the internal colleagues and internal touch points to really facilitate and make that argument for leadership.
Yeah, I love that. Tobias, I'm going to ask you a question. One add on that too, Tito, is like in a lot of organization, there's innovation for innovation's sake. It's like, let's just go try it. It's new. I read about it. The CEO read about it on an airplane. Let's go play with X technology. I think what's really cool here is you've got the bottoms up, top down, combining, right? So there's obviously big strategic thinking on where should we go, but also there's this: what are the business problems? What are the pain points where the status quo isn't delivering the value that the business unit or P&L owner needs, and how do we use innovation to unlock that? Whether it's friction busting, whether it's grabbing new markets, right? And when you connect those two, now you're talking about transformation, because you have adoption of the technology, you have deployment of it, you can put governance and the protections around it to enable people to go solve their pressing problems. So I love that combo and how this does it. And I think the insights is actually feeding the organization, saying, hey, wait a second, there are different ways we can solve our problems. Let's be more creative. Let's look to new solutions. So the question I have for you from Tobias is, how long did it take to overcome the not invented here mentality? The We have to build it, whatever it is, we have to build it. Partnering is, either we know how to do it ourselves, or we've done it before, or we could do it if we had time to do it.
Yeah.
How is that being overcome?
Yeah, I think, we're not unique at Comcast, and in that sense where we have similar, philosophies where we're builders, we're tinkerers as a group. We've, innovated a lot of different interesting products. And so there is interest and a bias towards building at Comcast, like many other large corporates that have a history of innovation. So, our team has been able to grow our footprint within the organization despite that, by a very tactical grassroots level, being really close to the pain points and the roadmaps. And so, like you mentioned, the P&L holder who is normally biased towards building certain things, but they see the reality of their quarterly goals and what they're struggling with, and where they're reaching bottlenecks, or where they aren't able to crack a particular problem, or they don't have the resources to kind of hit whatever they're trying to do. You know, our team does a really good job of understanding uh, who is tackling what, and who is maybe not on track to hit what they would like to hit, or would like to get there faster, or like to do it with less resources, and being able to have the right startup at the right time, to do that. And so, like you mentioned earlier, like, we've been getting away over the years, we've been getting way more inbound interest, because we do a good job of telling the story of business unit leaders who have been able to tackle a, galling innovation challenge by working with one of our startups. And so people who have these same kind of challenges, these same kind of constraints, are now coming to us and saying, hey, do you have a startup that addresses my need, increasingly? And so that it's being really, really close to pain points. People will come to you if they have pain and they think you can solve it. And so that's
Yeah.
kind of the step one needs to be in communicating. Our part of our insights really is communicating our successes in solving pain points for
Yeah.
our
It's
clients.
it's a vitamin versus the painkiller, right? It changes the dynamic. And the other thing is, it's not build or partner. It's not either or. It's and,
100%.
right? Like, it's like, for the things that are core and strategic, build away. You should, and you must. But then there's so many other pieces of this, the individual challenges, and I love it that, internally at your org, like when they have a problem, they think of Lift Labs and they say, hey, there might be a way that we can start on third base by working with a startup, and that is additive. It is not necessarily against the build mentality. Obviously, that's always an evolution. The last question, I think we have time, is, will you change your cadence on reporting the insights now that always on is part of your mentality?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we're open to that. We're trying to decouple our insights deliverable, like um, deployment calendar from our from our from our accelerators, which has traditionally been the way it's been. Like we have insights tied to the companies we've seen, screening wise, and then what we learned from the accelerator. And so we want to kind of take that more as we move to always on sourcing that kind of year-round approach. And so I think we're still trying to fine-tune what the right cadence is for our audience. I think there's always a ton in this space that we can talk about. It's about getting the right cadence, I think, that makes sense for our audience. I think, it's probably more is better, I would say, in the short to medium term, just in terms of the appetite for more content. I think, like I said, our team's done a really good job of like mixing in different mediums for disseminating these insights to make sure that we're trying to meet that demand.
Yeah, I think one thing that we should never let go public because it's overwhelming, but it is so fun is like our weekly insights internally of looking at what's happening, and that used to be like a maybe a monthly thing, and it just the pace of change is happening so quickly. It's really enjoyable to go back and forth with you and the entire team on where things are going, how things are evolving. But I think for more public facing or within the org you're right about striking that balance of you don't want to like just pour the fire hose on everybody and make sure that it's relevant and it's right for them. And even though you're at the forefront and are really excited and absorbing all this, oftentimes other people are at a different place in their journey of it. And so how do you make this usable and actionable that they can take to their jobs?
100%.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Venture Fuel Visionaries podcast. I hope you enjoyed these insights from Tito, the work that he and the team are doing at Comcast NBCUniversal LIFT Labs is truly at the tip of the spear for how corporates and startups are collaborating. I know this was both inspiring and educational for all of you out there that are trying to figure out how to make corporate and startup partnerships work to drive tangible commercial results. For those of you listening, please don't forget to subscribe, follow us on your socials for more episodes, and share with anyone you think might be interested in learning from industry leaders who are shaping the future of innovation. Thanks for listening.